In June 2010, one man set out on a stunt to break the most insane record in the history of poker. It was so extreme it had doctors worried and Guinness officials timing every move. He stayed locked in for days on the table, with no sleep, no caffeine, and no escape. And the craziest part? He still walked away with nearly $7,000 and a world record that would shatter the limits of poker for years. Let me explain what happened. By the year 2010, poker was still on the rise. The early 2000s moneymaker boom had turned Texas Hold'em into a worldwide craze. Suddenly, every guy with a laptop thought he could bluff his way into millions. ESPN was televising the World Series of Poker like it was the Super Bowl, and shows like High Stakes Poker and Poker After Dark made household names. Poker was booming glamorously, and maybe just a little bit ridiculously. And right in the middle of all this was Phil Locke, a 37-year-old who seemed born to make poker weird. You might not recognize his name immediately, but if you've ever seen a guy at the table rocking a hoodie pulled tight over his head, dark sunglasses hiding his eyes, and a grin that looks like he knows something you don't, that's Phil. They called him the Unabomber. Not exactly the nickname you want if you're trying to get through airport security, but perfect for a poker player who thrived on being unpredictable. Locke was an entertainer. Where most players stared down opponents with stone-cold faces, Locke cracked jokes, made bizarre side bets, and turned the poker table into his personal stage. His personality was half mischief, half mad scientist. He once dressed up like an old man to sneak into a tournament disguised as a grandpa. But don't let the clown mask fool you. Locke had serious chops. In 2010, the very same year this story takes place, he snagged his first World Series of Poker bracelet. For poker players, that's like finally earning your championship ring. Yet, while many pros would have ridden the wave into more tournaments and million-dollar tables, Locke seemed bored. Winning was nice, but it wasn't enough. He wanted something else, something bigger, stranger, and harder to survive. And standing just a few feet away most of the time was his girlfriend, actress and fellow poker player Jennifer Tilly. Yes, that Jennifer Tilly. Oscar nominee and star of Bound and the Chucky movies. Together, they were poker's oddball power couple. She, with her glamorous Hollywood vibe, and he, looking like a caffeine-deprived hacker hiding from the FBI. People couldn't help noticing their weird chemistry whenever they showed up in a card room. But here's the thing about Phil Locke. While his peers measured their lives in bracelets, cash winnings, and tournament titles, he had something else in mind. He was about to chase a record so absurd, most people wouldn't even believe it was possible. This wasn't money, fame, or another championship. This was way stranger. Something that would test the limits of his mind and body in a way no poker hand ever could. Because when you've already beaten the best players in the world, what's left to conquer but time itself? And let me ask you, would you risk your sanity just to see your name in the Guinness World Records book? If poker has one golden rule, it is this: know when to quit. Most players eventually push away from the felt, whether it's after a win, a loss, or just the creeping dread of going broke. But for Phil Locke, quitting wasn't in his vocabulary. He decided to test himself against something no opponent could bluff or fold against: time itself. Now, to understand the madness of his quest, you got to know what the benchmark was. In 2009, a British pro named Paul Zimber had set the official Guinness World Record for the longest continuous poker session. 78 hours, 25 minutes, and 45 seconds of nonstop play. 78 grueling hours. That's over 3 straight days, awake and locked into the rhythm of bets, raises, and folds. When Zimber set that bar, most of the poker world shrugged and said, "That's humanly impossible, record safe." But Phil Locke saw a number, and instead of backing away, he thought, "I can smash that." And because Guinness doesn't just let you nap on the side while calling it a marathon, the rules were brutal. Locke would get only 5 minutes of break per hour. If he didn't need them right away, he could bank them, meaning maybe take a 20-minute nap after 4 hours of play. But the clock never stopped, and neither did the deck. Opponents rotated in and out, and dealers swapped shifts, but Locke had to stay planted at the table. This wasn't a stunt for money. Well, not for him anyway. Locke made the attempt partly for charity. Half of his winnings would go to Camp Sunshine, a nonprofit retreat for kids with life-threatening illnesses and their families. That gave the challenge a noble edge on paper. He wasn't just playing cards. He was raising money for kids who had been dealt a far tougher hand in life. But if you peel back the layers, you can see other motives too. Locke was a showman to his core, the kind of guy who couldn't resist a spectacle. Breaking the record wasn't just charity, it was performance art. It was the ultimate prop bet against himself, staked on the biggest poker stage. But here's where the story sharpens. Staying awake for that long isn't just tough, it's dangerous. Sleep researchers at the Mayo Clinic and elsewhere warn that severe sleep deprivation can wreck the body in ways you can't just shake off with coffee. After 24 hours, concentration plummets. At 36, your reaction times are on par with someone legally drunk. Push past 48 and you're in no man's land. Paranoia, memory loss, and even hallucinations creep in. Past 72, doctors say you're risking physical collapse, organ strain, and a brain that might start misfiring signals like a bad light bulb. Locke knew all this, and he still signed up for the challenge without any caffeine or stimulants, just his own stubborn mind and some bizarre survival hacks that we'll talk about later. Many people thought he was just risking chips on the table, but this guy was seriously gambling with his own sanity. Seriously, what would you do if you were by his side? Hit like to cheer him on, or subscribe to beg him to stop. Let's rewind the tape back to June 2010 at the Bellagio Poker Room in Las Vegas. Normally, this place is buzzing with tourists trying their luck, locals grinding the cash tables, and pros hunting for soft spots. But on this particular day, the tension in the atmosphere was different. Reporters were everywhere with their notebooks out. Fans leaned over the rail. Some were skeptical, some just curious, but all were asking the same question. How long can this guy really last? Phil Locke sat at the center of it all, with his hoodie up and sunglasses on, looking like he was crossed between a monk and a prankster about to start a YouTube challenge. And of course, his partner in crime, Antonio Esfandiari, was nearby, the magician who always seemed half ready to turn a deck of cards into a disappearing act. With friends like Antonio egging him on, you just knew this wasn't going to be another dignified attempt. And here's the part that made jaws drop. Locke swore never to use caffeine entirely all through the challenge. He wasn't going to take Red Bull, coffee, or energy pills. Nothing at all. He wanted the pure record with no chemical shortcuts. Think about that. The rest of us can barely get through a Monday morning without a double shot of espresso. And this guy was planning to outlast a 3-day weekend at a poker table armed with nothing but willpower and baby powder? Seriously, he later used that to freshen up. The first day flowed like a normal poker session, at least on the surface. Opponents rotated in and out like extras in a movie scene, each one taking their shot at the guy chasing immortality. Some sat down watching him curiously, others just wanting to be part of history. The pots weren't massive. This wasn't high-stakes poker money flying around, but that wasn't the point. It was about the clock, and Locke was playing it like his biggest opponent. For starts, the first 12 hours didn't look like a big deal. You and I, we've all stayed up that long before, maybe from a night of partying, a work project gone late, or a Netflix binge. It's doable. Locke made it look almost effortless. If you had walked in at that moment, you might have thought, hey, maybe he's got this in the bag. But that was the trick, wasn't it? The beginning lulled everyone into a false sense of security. His jokes, his calm, his steady pace at the table painted the illusion of control. But unlike poker opponents, time doesn't get tired. It just keeps grinding you down, hand after hand, hour after hour. And while the Bellagio room was lighthearted in those opening hours, there was an undercurrent of tension brewing. People were already curious about what would happen on day 2 and beyond. Because everyone knew, sooner or later, the body would start rebelling. From midday on June 2nd until 7 a.m. on June 10th, Phil Locke was locked in the Bellagio poker room. That's 5 days without sleep. 5 days. Even saying that feels exhausting. At the start, he didn't look too scary. He was still laughing, making jokes, and handling his stack like any other day. But as the hours dragged on, you could begin to see the cost. His words started to slur. His hands shook when he picked up chips. Sometimes his eyes closed for a split second at the table. Little micro naps, and then he'd snap back awake as if nothing happened. And if your curiosity is as good as mine, you'd start to wonder, how much longer could his body take? The poker room itself made it worse. Lights were never dimmed, the buzz of cameras never stopped, and the dealers kept changing shifts while Locke was the only constant sitting there. Imagine being trapped under bright lights for days while the world rotates around you. That's where he was. Instead of caffeine, he stretched, meditated, and even dusted himself with baby powder like he was trying to trick his brain into feeling fresh. At one point, a friend offered him $1,000 for charity if he could drop and do 30 push-ups. And guess what? He dropped and did them right there on the casino floor. The money went to Camp Sunshine, and Phil brought himself another burst of focus. That's just the kind of person he is. Stubborn, playful, and always ready to turn pain into a joke. His friends never left his side. Antonio Esfandiari was nearby, joking and cheering, but looking more nervous by the hour. Jennifer Tilly watched proudly, but also with real worry in her eyes. Others, like Scotty Nguyen and Thuy Doan, came by for support. It looked like fun on the surface, but under it all was tension. Was this record worth what it was doing to him? Around the 92nd hour of his poker marathon, something strange began to happen. Phil later admitted he experienced a hallucination. "I knew I was in the casino," he said, "but I thought maybe I was somewhere in France. I didn't know." At around the 100-hour mark, Phil posted a line on his blog saying, "Having a stellar time. No matter how this plays out, no repeats." That was the truth. After 6 months of training and 5 days of grinding, he knew this wasn't something his body could survive twice. This one time alone was too much. And not to forget, the whole thing almost ended before it began. The record was set in a 10-20 no-limit hold'em poker game. Earlier on in the attempt, Phil went bust twice. At one point, he was down only $800 on the table, but he bought back in, this time with $100,000, and from then on, his giant stack proved how much was at stake. Not just money, but pride and reputation. By this point, everyone in the room knew if he chose to quit here, nobody would blame him. But for Phil, walking away before the record wasn't an option. This was a childhood dream, and he was going to see it through, no matter how much it hurt. Phil had passed every test the first few days. Now came the hardest one, breaking the record itself and deciding just how far past human limits he was willing to go. Before Phil Locke sat down at the table, the number to beat was 78 hours and 45 minutes. That belonged to Paul Zimler, a British pro who nearly collapsed at the end of his run in 2009. When Phil first sat down, his goal was to hit 80 hours. That was it, just enough to pass the old mark and claim his spot in the Guinness book. But poker has a way of daring you to push further, and that's exactly what he did. Because instead of packing it in at 80, he said he'd try for 90. Then, almost like he was daring himself, he kept going. Quick question, if it were you, would you have stopped at 80? As the hours climbed, from 90 to 100 to 105, Phil's speech dragged slower, and his hands trembled more. The crazy part was he kept playing solid poker, folded strong hands, made smart calls. Even when his body was shutting down, his instincts didn't leave him. That almost made it scarier. Once he blew past the benchmark, the whole room changed. You could almost feel people holding their breath. He wasn't just breaking the record, he was leaving it in the dust. Every extra hour felt like a health risk, but also like history in the making, and Phil knew it. The crazy part is, even after all that, he still walked away a winner, literally. He ended the marathon session up $6,766, and instead of pocketing it all, he split it right down the middle. $3,383 went to Camp Sunshine, a charity that helps kids with severe illnesses enjoy camp life. The rest had already been sweetened with donations from friends and fans who jumped in with side challenges, like that moment when someone bet him $1,000 to drop and do 30 push-ups. He did them, half asleep and all, and the kids got the money. That's how this wild poker stunt also turned into a fundraiser. By the end, though, you could see that it had taken everything out of him.
I had serotonin highs, I had everything. I had sickness.
His voice was slow, his eyes barely open. His friends hovered nearby like nervous guardians. And when that final hand was done and the clock stopped at 115 hours, the room erupted in an uproar. Everyone was grinning like they had just watched someone run a marathon blindfolded. And here's the part that makes it stick. It was about a childhood dream. As a child, Phil was very much like most youngsters that pick up a copy of the Guinness Book of World Records for the first time. He had tried breaking into the record in Pongo at no avail. Then he gave everything trying to recite pi in the classroom. That dream also hit a brick wall. Finally, the world of poker opened a new way for him into the record books to accomplish his lifelong dream at 37. The little boy flipping through the Guinness World Records book finally got his name printed inside. He traded sleep, health, and maybe a few brain cells to do it, but he made it. The attempt showed how far the game of poker had come. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about endurance, entertainment, and stunts that pulled mainstream attention. Guinness confirmed it, Poker News and Card Player covered it like it was a heavyweight title fight, and for one shining moment, Phil Locke, the Unabomber, became the man who outlasted time. Phil Locke got what he always wanted, his name in Guinness, a check to charity, and a poker legend sealed forever. But he also walked away saying, no repeats, because sometimes the price of history is knowing you'll only ever pay it once. Since then, the record has been broken by Zach Gensler, but his story took a different turn when it came to making money. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video about him.